Thanks so much, everyone. And now we're going to hand over to our wonderful next speakers, who I'll also let introduce themselves. Alana Marsh and Marie Dennis are part of our wonderful Indigenous steering group for Regenerative Songlines Australia. And Alana, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Alana Marsh. I'm actually living down in Melbourne at the moment, so on land that Wuurrk speakers have loved and laughed on for thousands of years. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here in this event. I'm a Miriam woman from the Torres Strait, but I've only ever lived on mainland Australia. I'm slowly sliding down the east coast. I was born up in Innisfail in far north Queensland, grew up on Bundjalung country around Lismore, and I've been down here for about 17 years. Marie, would you like to introduce yourself now as well?
Sure. Watamali. My name is Marie. I'm a Berry-Gubba woman from North Queensland. I also draw connection back to Ambay Island, Aboriginal Stray Islander woman. I would like to acknowledge the Yugambeh people of the lands in which I'm meeting on today, pay respects to their ancestors and the traditional custodians of the lands here, and acknowledge that they allow me to walk here safely. I'd also like to extend the acknowledgement to everyone who's with us today and the lands that you're all meeting on today. But, this is actually a big privilege to be a part of this group, and the conversations today have been absolutely amazing. I will hand back to Alana because I'm sure we'll get to, I'll be able to have a bit more of a chat in between with Alana. So we're just going to have a bit of a yarn today. Thanks, Alana.
Beautiful. Thanks, Marie. So I just wanted to invite everybody to either lower their gaze or close their eyes, because I want to do a little bit of a guided visualization for you, because it's that emergence of the being state that will actually resource the work that we're conceiving here. And as you draw that air into your lungs and you settle in on your hip bones to where you're seated, I want you to think about the vibrations that have been carried in that air that you're taking into your body. It's a very intimate process. And we're just going to take a moment to establish that pattern of gentle and purposeful breath, knowing that there's been vibrations of laughter, of dance, of music, ceremony from this continent that you are actually drawing into your body with that breath. Allowing that breath to open up your heart space. I'd like to send some love and gratitude to our collective mother, Mother Earth. And as your heart space opens, I want you to think about, what is the message from her that you're hearing? What is that vibration that she might be sending out to you, that you've allowed yourself to open up to receive? I now would like to pay some love, respect, gratitude to the traditional custodians all over this continent of Australia that have lived in harmony and reciprocity with that collective mother for thousands and thousands of years. Not just surviving, but thriving through 2 polar caps melting, ice ages, a whole range of climate change. Climate change is a constant because climate is alive, so it's a living system. And as you draw that breath in, once again, I'm inviting you to open up your heart space to those traditional custodians who may be in your lineage or who may not be in your lineage. But you have a responsibility, a privilege, a joyful right to make alive that legacy that you've inherited from those traditional custodians. So just taking a moment to think of what is that vibration, that message that you're opening yourself up to receive. And as a final acknowledgement of respect and gratitude, I'd like to extend that to contemporary custodians. So we know that there are many people from the traditional custodians who are also contemporary custodians. But we have this opportunity today to weave in people from over the waters, new, emerging, existing technologies, to grapple with some of the wicked problems that have been created. We are very uniquely placed on this continent through our Regenerative Songlines project and the other efforts, the other activity that we may be doing, to actually be a bit of a role model for the rest of the world. So I'd like you to think about what your contribution is as a contemporary custodian, regardless of your cultural background. And as we move through this process, I want you to ensure that you don't rush to the doing, the busyness of making something happen, that you allow it to fully land in self and have that emergence of the being state. So continuing that pattern of gentle and purposeful breath, going to invite you to roll your shoulders, raise your eyes, open your eyes. And know that you'll have many more opportunities to delve more deeply into what is your contribution to this new way of being in the world that we are co-creating. But Marie and I really wanted to talk to you about Wayapa. It's a wellness modality, a species-centered wellness modality that elevates our connection to country as the fundamental platform for mind, body, spirit wellness. It's been created down here in what we now know as Victoria by Jamie Thomas and Sarah Jones. Jamie is a Gunditj Mara Gunai man, and Wayapa means connect from the Pikarung language, so from around Warrnambool in the Western District of Victoria, and Wuurrk means country. So we really very much share with lots and lots of different people in lots and lots of different settings, and provide them with a non-judgmental, nourishing prompt to remember things that their ancestors would have lived by. But, you know, because of the pressures of modernity or things that may be going on, they may have forgotten. So it has 14 elements and a movement sequence attached to those 14 elements. And we use that somatic reset in simple but very profound ways. And guided visualization is also an aspect of what we do. So there's a whole range of ways, and, you know, like most First Nations things, very holistic in its application and its accessibility for people. I love understanding more about systems of knowing, being and doing, so head, heart and hands. And I think Wayapa is a really profound vehicle for being able to do that. And because it's so contextualized to the group, you know, we often, I often say that, you know, they actually bring the magic. We have the structure, we have the container that allows the magic to come forth. I'm passing a baton to you now, gorgeous.
Thanks, Alana. That was beautiful. Thank you. I always love when you share your visualizations, but I want to show gratitude to the amazing speakers that we've had already leading up to our space that we're holding now with you. Annie Mary, Annie Ann, Tyson, and Michelle, and everyone else that jumped in, Chelsea. It just actually confirms the space that we're in with how important sharing Wayapa work is for both Alana and I, and I'm sure for the rest of our practitioners, it's, you know, it's all about taking that ego out and connecting to country, like and being able to share that wisdom and knowledge, but giving everyone an understanding of what that is. We've been conditioned to live in a world where we've become so disconnected from country. We've been disconnected from our space, our place that Auntie Mary talked about, that we were born in that place, you know, and not fully understanding our purpose to look after that. And for me personally, Wayapa has actually enabled me to rebirth those connections, and through the regenerative songlines, it's increased my excitement around being able to regenerate the songlines that we have on country. Tyson talked about the Bruce Highway, and I'm a North Queensland woman, and just driving along the Bruce Highway for most of my life, you know, without fully understanding that until recently, that has been a part of my story and my people's story, and that has encompassed my identity completely. So being able to connect that for myself, my family, and my extended community, and sharing that knowledge and understanding that we as a human race have a complete responsibility to care for our Mother Earth, and to look after her, so that future generations have somewhere that they can sustainably live and they can connect to, and they can have full identity in that place. You know, it's not just, I loved the way that Auntie Mary talked about relationalism and survivalism. We've been living in a space of survivalism for so long that we've disconnected the importance of relationalism, and that it's not just about relations with ourselves, but with other people, which is what I've found other modalities have engaged in with the mind, body, and spirit. But what Wayapa has brought back to focus and attention for me is that relationalism Auntie Mary talked about with the land, which is the utmost and important foundation that we can take from our First Nations people's wisdom and philosophy of caring for Mother Earth first and foremost. She is our ultimate mother, that provides for us. Lots of people have talked, you know, we've talked about the importance of ensuring that our Indigenous knowledges need to have a place and a space. They, for me, need to have prime position, actually. I've done the crazy thing, and by the encouragement of others, to go back and how can I actually help embed Indigenous knowledges into educational spaces that I've worked in, and even into the workshops that we actually do with people. How do I help to educate people better, feeling more informed about how do I communicate better? And for me, for schools, and Auntie Anne talked about, you know, we need to not take for granted the wisdom of our young people. They are reborn. You know, they're some of the young people I talk with, I feel like they know more than I do. I'm learning from them. It's like they've been here before, and they're just sponges for knowledge, and we need to be having these conversations with them. And it's important that we not only just have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, history and knowledges in the educational spaces, but that as a foundation and grounding for every part of curriculum, not just a cross-curriculum subject. And that will educate not just our own Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, South Sea Islander, children, but every other child that's a part of the human race, that we will, Auntie Anne talked about, we're building this unity pathway. And I'm quite, I feel a great sense of gratitude that I was gifted Wayapa work as a modality to help me you know, use that to facilitate a soft conversation, because it's all about planting seeds. People will hear the messages when they want to hear them, when they're ready to hear them. But I feel like Tyson talked about now, there's so many people now that are willing to be a part of that space, and they're ready to listen. They want to know how they can contribute. And I think that it's really exciting times. You know, I had a moment like Chelsea where I sat and I cried about, well, what's happening? What kind of future is my son going to have? And it's at that moment I thought, well, it needs to just be more than, let's not use plastic straws anymore. You know, it needs to be, we need to be doing more in this space. And I'm very grateful for people like Alana in my life as well. And, you know, I've now embarked on the regenerative practitioner program myself, where, you know, it's all about evolving our own knowledge, and how can we impart that in all the different spaces and places, so that we can encourage different thinking, decolonize the thinking that we've been conditioned to live with. And sorry, Alana, I feel like I'm taking over a lot of time, but I had an interesting conversation with a lady that I'll just quickly share yesterday. She's doing a spiritual Australian doco, and she reached out just to ask some questions about Wayapa. And just, it kind of just brings me back to the point I was talking about. People, when they're ready to have these conversations, they'll have them, they'll be ready to listen. And it's, I have a strong, you know, my passion is that we need to actually understand from our First Nations people's wisdom, go back to the knowledge and philosophies that actually sustained our country for thousands and thousands of years, to be able to move forward. But where her mindset was she clearly wasn't ready to hear that. It was all about the now. But I feel like our way forward is to actually engage ourselves in understanding the knowledge and wisdom of our First Nations people of this land, the oldest living culture in the world, to understand how we can actually evolve and move forward together, and providing that understanding and sharing that with the rest of the human race. But yeah, sorry, Alana.
That's great. Thank you. I feel like you've covered us off. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have 1 minute left if you did want to say any concluding comments, Alana. It's been lovely to listen to you both.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Love it. When it's done, it's done. Well, thank you so much, Alana and Marie. And I'm sure if you look in the comments, you'll see some really lovely feedback and positive comments. I did share your website, Alana, but if you have any other links you'd like to share or information.
I put the Wayapa one to the panelists and the attendees as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, lovely ladies.
Thank you.
And yes, either a daggy air clap or press your little clap button, folks, or whatever you feel like.
Thank you for allowing me to share space with you, and the amazing other speakers.
Thank you for being with us. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Ross Williams. He's a director of Future Dreaming with Mary and myself. And he's also just a tireless advocate for a whole range of important social projects in Brisbane and beyond. So I'm really honoured and delighted to introduce Ross Williams. Over to you, Ross.
Thanks, Michelle, and Wuurrk, everybody. I also want to pay my respects to some incredible people that are on this seminar today, Auntie Mary and Dr. Anne, Michelle and Tyson and many others on this Regenerative Songlines event. And I also want to just extend my respect to Alana and Marie as well, because I'm also from the Bindal people, which is in the Townsville region, which is the Wuurrk language group, and also on my mother's side is from Mare and Arab in the Eastern Islands of the Torres Strait. I live on Turrbal in Yagara country Brisbane here, or Meridian as they call it now, which is the, I guess, the correct language. It's the Aboriginal language for this area. As a director of Future Dreamings, we always talk about what is country and what does country mean to others, and we try and examine what country is. And with this, we talk about the songlines. I think I was going to do a presentation through the modern tools for the songline called PowerPoint, but I won't. I'll just yarn up a little bit more on using the voice. It's probably one technique of modern. But I wanted to take you sort of a bit of a journey around caring for country and how that then interacts with the songlines language and around what the speakers have spoken about so far, and how that all fits in, and looking at it from the cultural perspective in terms of interaction with land. I also then want to then touch on quickly a little bit later on just about what people can do in order to be able to do their part. We often hear about this whole global issue of what's happening around the globe, but we don't necessarily act locally in order to react on a global stage. I want to sort of examine that a little bit more. But I wanted to talk about as Indigenous people as custodians, and that custodianship comes from an obligation to look after the land and uphold that first law, the law from the land, and the land that governs the land from water, air, plants and animals. We are guided by our land and the animals within it. I mean, if we don't, then it becomes, as already mentioned, the whole process becomes out of whack, and we're only damaging not only the planet, but we're damaging ourselves and ourselves in terms of where we live from a global perspective. As First Nations people, there's a hand down through songlines and through the application of songlines and stories and artwork, because we then start to describe the way we see the world, and when we see we know the world that we see, and often the colonials don't see how we see it. It's just a different application. Colonially, they speak of 4 seasons. From an Indigenous perspective, we have up to 6, 7 and 8 different types of seasons just here in Australia, and there's all those subtle relationships from early winter to deep winter to pre-spring to true spring to high summer to late summer. There's all these variations and different triggers that the environment will provide us. So the environment provides us with a whole level of experiences, and those experiences as human beings we've got to actually understand. To understand that, we also got to look at not only just the seasons, but the seasons, the plants, the movement of the animals, when they're moving, how they're moving, when they come in, when there's flowering around you. So what we try to do is get people to understand what is around their environment. So who are we is a deeper question, but how do we fit into the planet as a species is something that we can control and that we have some cognitive knowledge about. And I think that's one of the critical things, but we started to lose sight of the 5 senses that we use. And some people don't even think about the 5 senses, the eyesight, the smell, the hearing, the taste and touch. When you're dealing in the environment, you're looking at the environment, everything is based on those senses. If you work and operate off those senses, you start to see your environment in a different way. And you can see it, you can smell it, you can hear it, you can taste it, and you can touch it. So those variety of senses gives you different interpretations of land, water, wildlife, plants, and then you collect a level of information using that knowledge through sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. And that then gives you an idea of the landscape, and that is one continuum. It's not not broken up into many parts as Westerners would like to use it. It's actually a continuum of the same mechanisms at all those parts that we talk about. We look at the landscape as and once it's broken, the difficulty is we can see that it's broken, and people need to use their senses about the lens by which they look at the landscape and how that landscape becomes broken. We see around the planet rising sea levels. We talk about climate change, and climate change is a reality. But here, for some unknown reason, we seem to be insulated from that impact of climate because we think that it's happening elsewhere, but not to us. It is happening to us. It's like, you know, we're slowly starting to ferment in our own, behaviours, if you like, is probably one for a better word. I do have another word, but I'm not going to use that. But what we do is, as a society, we look at the prolonged dryness of the landscape. We're looking at the longevity of dryness. We're looking at, and people have seen the fires, and that the argument around fire management and techniques and behaviours of this landscape, it's all changing. And it's got to come from the improvements of us. We talk about a lot of animals and birds and bees even around pollinisation. We don't see that, but it's action in work, in our nature. And how possums are so vital, for instance, when you see them running around and you hear them scratching on your roof and so forth, and you get angry about that, don't get angry about it, because they're trying to cross-pollinate as well. They're prolific cross-pollination of plants and species and animals. So we've got to look at it as a different lens of how we look at the environment. The environment is a supermarket, it's a pharmacy. And I think we need to then, you know, start to rethink as a species, if you like. So what we're trying to do is we as a species have been evolving or been forced to evolve away from nature, but we still breathe the same air as nature. So we can't get away from that. You know, the whole thing around understanding of our environment from an Indigenous perspective is the philosophy, is the cultural understanding of that. And songlines tell you those sort of types of stories. It tells you behaviours and language. We talk about laws and law as an L-O-R-E as well. So, and then there's all these other cultural biases that become an overlay since colonisation, and the disconnect and the destruction of the environment as we see it right now. I think one of the best examples that I can give is and I don't know whether people have, when they go around, used to fly around anyway, being in a plane, I used to look down and I think 35,000 feet, and we don't exist as human beings. I think we can see a few nests of where we live, you know, like the cities and the landscape, but then the destruction of the landscape, the broad brush approach through land clearing and so forth, we can see the behaviours. But when you look down from that sort of level, we don't see a human being. We see where they've been, but we don't see them. So we've got to magnify that from a human perspective on our landscape. And we've got to start to use the thousands of generations that have passed down around, I call mind mapping. The stories are told, and Indigenous people are told in different ways, there's different techniques and different mediums. Songlines, as First Nations people, have continued the history and the songs, and it is the main memory, if you like, of us for over 65, 75, who knows. But since we've become human in this place and beyond that, as Auntie Mary would say, and she's absolutely correct. The best thing, that way I could describe it, is that human brain is the best way it connects is through song and music. And if we look at it across the planet, it's exactly the same. We've just started to move away from it. Well, most people have moved away from the most powerful use of our mind is connecting up music with place and place with music. We can sing about it. It's like the old country songs, you know, they sing about stories and history, and they talk about love life and all that sort of type of stuff, and falling in love, falling out of love, you know, all that. That becomes a part of history, and it becomes a memory. Songlines are very similar in terms of the memory map of a landscape. It's about signing of knowledge and identifying knowledge. Songlines are conveying lore, expectations around astronomy, water places, resting places, navigational techniques it's used as, animals, locations. It's all there in those songlines, and songlines can take on a variety of different things. So in essence, I'd like to talk about, you know, this, we simply can't exist without the earth being healthy and providing for us. It's as simple as that. And for humans, we move so far away from it. We come from the earth and we'll go back to the earth. You can't go anywhere else. I mean, it's as simple as that as well. And these are some of the things that I've been told over quite a while now, you know, yeah, decades and decades. I was going to say, you know, generation and generation, probably is a couple of generations in there. But the reality is that those are the true elements. And some people, we look deep into the Earth's learnings. From there, we can see what is happening and what is about to happen, and particularly what the future holds for us. And I think science is certainly getting a lot better of a handle on that and starting to understand from cultural learnings and putting science together with it to describe exactly what we know is going to happen in another 50 years, 100 years time. Now, it's really critical that we learn from all those type of things in terms of what we do. How to think, but not what to think. We need to get away from this cognitive chafing in order to learn about from First Nations people. And sometimes we have to unlearn what we think we know. Is one magnificent saying that I got picked up from a thing in Western Australia, is that, and it's absolutely correct, we have to sometimes unlearn what we think we know in order to then unpack it and repack what we do need. So navigation of the land is important as navigating through the skies. My mob in particular are sky people. So we not only navigate through land, we navigate through the sky, and the sky tells us stories, and it tells us through song and dance and art and stories as well, so that we understand our complexities of our relationship to not only our environment, but our animals and species, when they come, when they go, when there's seasonal, when there's visiting birds and so forth. We know all that sort of stuff. That has to be handed down. One of the questions is, can you see not just yourself, but animals and plants in your environment, and the moving through your environment, in and through water, landscape and air? You need to look at your own environment and see what you can see. I likened it to, it's like dark matter. We know it's there. We have a sense of it. We just can't see it, says the science, you know, or can we? You know, the reality is, I love to take that tag on, I am dark matter, therefore I am. And I love that sort of type of stuff. I wanted to talk about just a songline too, from a visit I had with the Haida Gwaii and in Canada, and talked about the movements of canoes over the vast seas and through the South Pacific and all the way into places like Vanuatu and then connecting up with the Torres Straits. I found that so powerful, and for me as a lonely Indigenous person from where I was based then, Townsville, and then going over there, but understanding that songline come all the way through. Those are sort of type of powerful songlines. It goes through the global aspect and across Australia. So an Australian shouldn't be looking elsewhere for answers or for other people to fix up our environment. We actually got to think and do locally, and so that we have a global outcomes for humanity and nature. And as I said, it's learning from, well learning, and learning from many people who've taught me how to read and learn from the land. That's then what laws I've learned, and each of those components fit into the environment. The way I've been able to be, my obligation to the land is through people. And so I've learned all these practices and learned all these techniques, but it's applied as well. And I go out on a regular occasion and apply that knowledge and experience from different law and different practices. And those are carried out, and that's an obligation from me to Mother Earth. So, governments continue to fail us. It's up to us as societies and us as individuals to see what we can do across the planet. We need to be able to think that we're not useless, but combined we can collectively make changes, and we are making changes around a lot of things, but are we doing it in a practical and timely sense? I would suggest probably not, when you look at what's happening around the planet. I'm really hopeful that we need to, as a species, operate in an effective manner, because we can't, no one else is going to do this. We can't talk to somebody else. We can't go to a deity and ask them for solutions, or they or them or whatever they are, for solutions. It's not about the deity, it's about us as human beings and what we can do. We live in this environment. So the art of healing comes from nature. All life comes from nature. All medicines come from nature. All our foods and water come from nature. What does that tell you? If we don't have nature, we're going to struggle, and we then have a time limit on us as a species. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Ross. Wonderful words and some wonderful comments in there. Some people responding to your words, Ross, if you did want to read through there. Wow, I'm reflecting on my connection to place too, so I hope everyone is at the moment. It's beautiful to have the words of everyone today, making us feel good about the potential we all have together. So a small change in our program. Barry Hunter has got a few technical issues, but he's very positive that he'll be on about 2 o'clock. So what we're going to do is switch over, and I'll now invite Dominique Hess to talk with us, and then we'll go to Barry when he joins us just after 2 o'clock. So thank you so much again, Ross. Oh, sorry, I didn't do my daggy air clap. Thank you, Ross, yay. It would be lovely now. I'm just going to turn all the videos in the right direction. Dominique, if you're able to speak, would you like to now introduce yourself and share with us some of your insights as one of the very original 5 or 6 of us who came together to begin Regenerative Songlines?
Thank you so much, Michelle. Can I just check that you can see my slides?
Yes, we can see you and your slides. All is well. Hallelujah.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I feel honoured to be amongst the speakers of today, and super excited about that potential of regenerative songlines. I'd like to start with my acknowledgement. I live near the waters of the Maribyrnong, which is the Maribyrnong, which flow into the Nurme Port Phillip Bay. And behind me are the Wurrk Yuangs that over time have eroded away and created the soils on which I live. I pay Wuurrk respect to the elders past and present, and to the wisdom that is here in the land. I am an aspiring custodian, and I'm really honoured to be part of this conversation. I am on the lands of the Wurundjeri as part of the Kulin Nation. So this is my background. I've written a couple of books, but what I'm really here to tell you about is Designing for Hope, which was a book about regenerative development that came out in 2014 that I wrote with a colleague from South Africa, Professor Krishna du Plessis. I came to Australia in '82, at the start of '82, having grown up in South Africa and Brazil to Dutch parents. And I think that the start of my love for the potential of the future and for nature and its people was the time in rural New South Wales where I was a moody teenager that didn't want to talk to anyone. I was quite an introvert and spent a lot of time walking the hills around Gresford, where I spent my teenage years until I escaped and travelled the world. But this was very formative for me. And because of that care for nature, I was very concerned about all of the bad things that were happening, the loss of species. Every time I hear about species extinction, it's a punch to the guts, really. And so I started a science degree, then did an engineering degree, and then did a PhD, all around this. What can I do to help humanity to thrive? We have so much potential. There is art and music and just the great things of love and community. How come we're doing all this bad stuff? Surely there must be a fix to it. And I spent 20 years of my life trying to find the way to get people to pull up their socks and behave and just do the right thing, guys. Come on. And on the 8th of April 2008, my daughter was born, and I had some maternity leave, and I was holding her in my arms, this potential life, this joy. And I heard about a young engineering student who had given up on life because they saw no hope. They saw no role for themselves in a hopeful future. And as I looked at this potential, I went, no. And I know we're not allowed to swear, but stuff this with stronger words. There is hope, there is wonder, there is beauty, there is story, there is music, there is dance, there's art, there's wine and coffee, and there's so much potential. And what can I do to have a role within that? And that's when the eventual book Designing for Hope started, but it started as a subject that I developed and taught at the University of Melbourne. And so the start of it really was thinking, how do we shift this worldview from extractive to contributive? And in fact, the name of the book was Contributive Practice to start with. And it wasn't until I sat with Bill Reid, a mentor and hero of mine, and he asked me, well, why are you writing this book? And why are you writing this book? Because I'd never shared the story of that young engineering student. And finally, after the 5th or 6th time where he just hammered me with these why questions, I threw up my hand in tears and said, because there is hope, there must be hope. We can't have this potential of our youth thinking there is no hope. And so that's how the name came to be. And that's what the book is about. It's about practical solutions that we can use to shift how we practice from an extractive worldview into a contributive worldview. And we start with the land, with country, with understanding the ecological worldview. We start here with the ideas of values. If we really listen to nature, if we really listen to our ecosystems, if we look at the way it behaves, then what are the values that we should bring into our practice? And then there are a series of chapters that give different tools and different approaches to then working within the ecological worldview. We start with the reconnection to nature as being critical to this journey, and then how to work with nature. So the ideas of biomimicry, biophilia, permaculture, and so forth. And within each chapter, there are the theories related to that, the key thinkers, the key tools, and case studies that show how it happens in the real world. It then goes into, and so there's also builds to regenerative development and regenerative design and the tools to support this contributive regenerative practice. I have to say though, as much as we love the word regenerative practice, regenerative development, at the end of the day, it's not really about the term that we give to this practice. It is the intent of finding how we step up and contribute back to the systems that help us thrive. So currently regenerative development is the term that people are attaching to this idea of contributive practice, or how do we become a positive part of the future of the systems that we are a part of. But I'm sure that in 10 years' time, people will look at what we're doing now and go, that's so old-fashioned. Here's the new word. So don't hang your hat on the word, hang your hat on the intent of contributing, listening, learning, building relationship. And so we bring in that aspect of the importance of the journey for self. So it's not about fixing the out there. It's not about energy efficiency and so forth. It is really building the will and building that sense of I am part of a living system and therefore I have to contribute to that living system. So regenerative thinking in a nutshell. You probably will have heard this saying, give a person, the original saying was give a man, but give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day. Right, that's a good idea. Help people to eat. Teach them how to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. Well, yes, well. And then you start making money out of it. And then it starts being, you know, that money starts being the aim, not the feeding. And we go on this journey of extraction because we have learned how to fish, but what we haven't learned is how to love the ocean. And that's where regenerative development, or this thinking about what role can I play to give back, to contribute, to build relationship with place, that is that teaching to love the ocean. Because when you love something, you look after it. You think, what can I do? What can I do to make you better, to help you laugh and love and be present and thrive? So that is what regenerative development, its intent is. There are many, many ways of doing that. And there are wonderful people, and you'll see within the Regenerative Songlines Network, wonderful projects all around Australia that are starting to work together with country, together with each other, building relationship and saying, what can we do to contribute to Australia, contribute to our place? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. That was a really lovely overview and some very beautiful photos too. There are some lovely comments coming in, and I've noticed that Barry has now joined us, which is wonderful. So first we might go a big thank you to Dominique. Yay! I think one of the nice ways to connect with Dominique's work would be to grab her book. And we unashamedly plug everybody's books and websites and programs because these are where people's ideas lie. So track them down, read their material. It's wonderful. I'll certainly be putting your book on my reading list for the next few months, Dominique. So thank you so much. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Barry Hunter. He's had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we'll just check in with him if he's doing okay. So Barry?
Yeah, can you hear me all right, Michelle?
Yeah, we can see you just fine.
Great.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really glad you could join today. As a kickoff for Regenerative Songlines, it's important to have your good self and your amazing work and experience with caring for fire country. So I'm going to put the spotlight on you, Barry. Yay. And if you do have slides, you can share them now. And if you don't, that's fine too. So over to you, Barry, to introduce yourself in your proper way.
Thanks. Is that showing all right? Is my...
Yes, it's great.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, my apologies. I had some I was trying to get on earlier, but had some problems, technical problems with my speaker and stuff like and audio. Yeah, so my name is Barry Hunter. I work around Indigenous land and sea management in Australia, mostly across Northern Australia with different groups, supporting and providing assistance around application or planning, or both sometimes. In particular, I'm working with my mob, the Jabbergai Boomba Rangers, which I started this ranger activity a long time ago here and went through different sort of boom and bust periods. And what I thought I'd talk on today, and I know, Michelle, that does sort of cover fire within the heading, but I thought I'd talk about broader stuff than that in regards to the good work that land and sea managers are doing in this week's theme for healing country. So yeah, I'll just go through. I've got a number of slides here that I'll quickly go through in the next few minutes to leave some time for questions if there's any questions there. but yeah, as the theme suggests, you know, like people have had aspirations for a long time to manage country. You know, like certainly, I'm sure, you know, as people were sort of living on missions, they had that aspiration to go out and saw how country was changing and being affected by not having people in the landscape. But in terms of ranges, you know, like I certainly know when Cape York and parts of Northern Territory, that ranges have been around for about 40 years. And in those early days, those aspirations were there for managing natural and cultural resources, but it wasn't necessarily the work in doing that. A lot of it was community-based, and certainly around where councils, local government, Aboriginal councils were. And so, you know, like part of that, as the work has sort of evolved over the last 30, 40 years, it's been about redefining that and building that cultural knowledge system that was there, but redefining it and bringing it back in terms of management, because it's that obligation to manage country that only Mary often speaks about, that obligation that we have as peoples to get out and manage country, and what form does that take, and certainly what form and the part that knowledge plays within that. So when we look around Australia, there are under the Working on Country funding from the Australian government, there are 129 ranger groups, 898.7 funded positions. I'm not too sure who the 0.7 is, but yeah, there's that much funding in that for those amount of positions, and predominantly across Northern Australia, though we're starting to see this happen more and more in Southern Australia. I'll put a link in there for a map on the NIA, National Indigenous Australian Agency site, that if anyone's interested to go and just click on there and have a look for with those ranger positions. We also see state governments also funding these types of positions, and some of the operations that I work with and my operation here at home with my mob are funded from the Queensland government, 100 positions. It was warming up the last election. Then Minister Enoch for Environment announced another 100 positions. So there's going to be 200 within the next few years. Western Australia have Indigenous Land and Sea Ranger positions funded, and they have invested a lot in training for Indigenous rangers over there, and there are also again across that top end a lot of positions funding under the Working on Country money. Northern Territory have a grants program that supports sort of on-ground outcomes for projects and equipment for a lot of those Indigenous land and sea operations that are there. And interestingly, we're starting to see more and more increase in the private sector and investment in positions working on country. You know, the likes of and the building of that private sector conservation estate. So the work that Australian Bush Heritage and Wildlife Conservancy, and that's a real interesting shift in terms of management and building to that national reserve system that we see in Australia. But again, the changing face of management and investment, and what that means for Indigenous peoples going forward is this increase in involvement in management on the ground. And I just want to couple this with other things that are there, is that there's obviously the native title legislation, and there's various state legislation, and through the determination process and registration process for claims, we're starting to see, and the land trust, specific land trust in each of the states, and local land trust in New South Wales, and Aboriginal land trust in Queensland and Northern Territory, and that Aboriginal freehold, we see that Aboriginal estate growing. It's growing larger and larger, and increasing. So what does that mean for management? And there's a variety of forms that management on that country takes, and sometimes there's nothing, there's no management. And there's also joint and co-managed areas, and you know, there is various states. We saw what happened with Kakadu, and it's not the full story that we saw on the ABC, but you know, there's particular issues there with joint management arrangements between Australian government and traditional owners, and it can be tenuous quite often, and sometimes, you know, like where traditional owners feel they're not getting that push within management or being listened to, it can turned devastating for both parties and for arrangements. But yeah, that's just a quick picture of some of the Indigenous land and sea management projects across Australia. And like I said, the increase in Southern Australia has been a recent one, but I'm sure welcomed. Some of the work that rangers were doing. So it used to be that they worked in community councils, and a lot of them were whippersnippering and sort of dealing with environmental health issues around councils and stuff like that. But now we're seeing a real diversification of those skill sets and experiences and projects, and more that research agenda growing. But managing weeds, ferals, fire management, and other biodiversity, water quality, sea country management, all those things are growing and building. And I'll put a link in there, and just want to shout out to Dr. Poelina there as well, that she was involved in this work around the Our Knowledge, Our Way guidelines that were developed by CSIRO. So there's a link there for some really interesting guidance and case studies around mobs being involved in land management, but also around research as well. But yeah, again, continuing that range of work around biodiversity, land assessment, so that, working with regional ecosystems assessment, fully understanding what's there. That work is important, I think, for more traditional owners to be aware of and to work within. So basically, there's not a piece of forest in Australia that isn't categorised somehow, and that's the regional ecosystem assessments. And more we're seeing our rangers being involved in that and taking their understanding of management of their country to a new level, because one of the things that we can do within that, which is important, is to be able to take those cultural indicators and apply cultural indicators to sorry, I've got a fire alarm going in the background here, to some of that work.
Do you need to leave the building, Barry?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
You don't want you to get in trouble.
So remote sensing and GIS is agriculture and horticulture, bush foods. Indigenous involvement around bush food is still only 1%, even though a lot of that knowledge that's out there has been based on or came from our old people, and that as a knowledge source. So I'll talk a bit more about opportunities and where this is going in a few minutes. Climate change action is growing, and we're going to see more engagement of traditional owners in and not so much mitigation work around that, but not just mitigation work around climate change, but particularly around research and engagement and monitoring and measuring climate change. And there's already a few groups around Australia that are doing that now. Water quality and water management is another massive area that's, pardon the pun, but untapped at this stage, because in terms of Indigenous involvement, and we're starting to see the political ramifications, particularly in the Murray-Darling Basin, around Indigenous push towards more cultural rights and cultural indicators relating to water, and our mobs push towards the recognition of rivers and water systems, if they're not dammed, as living entities. We're seeing more and more of that, and that's real interesting management ramifications, I guess, around that. And junior rangers, like being able to push into education of those next generation of leaders and rangers coming through. I just want to sort of quickly talk to when I put up those figures before around that 800. So the estimate, I think, in the when I look at it, is probably around sort of 14 to 1500 ranger positions. But I think you can double that in terms of the amount of people that are working, Indigenous mobs who are working in and around natural and cultural resource management. So whether they're doing cultural heritage works, involved in research, or even involved in and around that administration and support of ranger operations. I think you can safely push that up to that. So it's a growing industry, and it's growing a lot more in terms of structure and certainly not so much output, because I think the output has always been there, but certainly in regards to what's being produced and the way that's sort of changing. I spoke of joint management areas before, so we know that the three the Commonwealth Australian Government joint management areas, Jervis Bay, Uluru and Kakadu, and all those areas we're starting to see really incredible sometimes friction, sometimes things have moved forward, like the closing of the walk closing of the rock in Uluru, like seeing those sort of management decisions are groundbreaking and certainly not taken lightly, and understanding the cultural implications behind those and what that meant. Shout out to Brother Ross Williams there. We were at the vanguard of working in this area in the Marine Park, like 20-something years ago, and some of the fights that we used to have around getting cultural values recognised are still real. Like but I think the flexibility around the boundaries have stretched a bit further on those sort of things than we were. We were sort of bumping up against sort of that brick wall, but we certainly see that brick wall being pushed out further and further, and being able to move a bit more as well. But yeah, there's a whole lot of protected areas in Australia that are jointly managed between our mobs, and a whole range of different management arrangements. There's not one, except like in the Commonwealth model, there's not one sort of model that sort of is the principles, yeah, but they're all different between states and territories. Yeah, just a picture of some of the rangers and the type of work that they're undertaking out there and managing land and sea country and fire. So we're tuned into the future. I think what we're clearly seeing is a diversification that I spoke of in the range of skills and experience that rangers are learning. We're seeing a development and refining and reimagining of this thing called ecosystem services, and that's the services that we can derive from our natural environment around us. Tourism is a great example of that. That comes directly out of ecosystem services, being able to utilise that, and savanna burning methodology or reducing carbon through soil methodology under the approved carbon methodologies. So we're seeing those methodologies in effect changing the way people make money on country. And with the savanna burning methodology, again, that was based on a traditional activity that people have been doing for a long time. And basically the premise is that if you created this much output of carbon in a big fire, if you implemented a management plan and fire management burning, and you prescribe burning to lessen that, what would it look like in between in regards to reducing those carbon output? So yeah, there's a whole range of methodologies that have been formally recognised by the Australian government, and savanna burning is one of those. Interestingly enough, right now is that there's more whitefellas, more pastoralists out there now doing savanna burning than there are blackfellas. So they've realised the opportunities that are within this methodology and within carbon management. And utilising it. So we're starting to see other frameworks developed as well. So around offsets, already there's biodiversity offsets in New South Wales, the reef credit, and we're working between the chair. I'm the chair of the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and the Fire Sticks Alliance. We're working on this concept around a cultural fire credit. So to enable our mob to burn and burn country, and for that to be able to be managed and ensure that there's cultural burn and cultural knowledge behind it in order to have that credit. So there's a whole lot of evaluation and monitoring and stuff that we need to do around that framework in order to get it up. But these are some of the exciting things that are out there. And we'll see more and more, especially in environmental offsets, more and more come on, and more opportunities for our mobs to be involved in that diversification of work and income. And I think that's the important thing within the future, is being able to say, well, we've got this level of government investment that goes in the now, and with the Australian government alone, I think it's like 28 million per year. So how do we reduce the impost on that going forward? You know, like what's the opportunity for through the private sector, but also through Indigenous Land and Sea Ranger centres on their own to develop independent sources of income, and what they do with their money is up to them. But obviously, most times they put it back into managing country. So that's where I see it going into the future. Research is a big component of that, and I just wanted to bring attention in regards to, you know, like that we're seeing more focus on research ethics, and that's coming to the forefront. But there's still a lot of work to do out there in regards to the way our mobs engage and work in with the researchers. And I thought this was an interesting quote taken out of the review of the Indigenous knowledge work, the National Environmental Science Program work, and a guy called Ed Winsing and Tara Callanan took that work. But basically, they're talking there about, you know, like our mob still need that basis of recognition in order to, and it's based on an agreed respect and approach to protect that knowledge first and foremost, and then ensure that there's definite outcomes for our people within those processes. And indeed, where we need to head is more Indigenous-led research around it, so that it's us doing the research, and our research priorities are coming to the fore. You know, like gone to those days where people turn up in our community and say, I want to do this, and then draw impost upon our resources to go out and support their research, and all we get back from it is some recognition in a PhD or a master's statement. So being able to drive our mobs leading Indigenous research protocols, research processes, but importantly being able to meld that cultural knowledge and cultural bases within science and science approaches. And we've seen examples of that now. We have examples of that now. So I guess lastly, I just want to talk through that, just a summary of so more and more land is being handed back, and the reality is that a lot of our mobs are land rich but dirt poor. The reporting and variety of agreements between government and others is onerous. You know, there's an impost upon management sometimes. If I can use probably the best example is around the bush foods industry and our emerging. Like I said, we only make up 1% of involvement in the bush food industry, and it's up around the $80-something million now, and it's only fledgling industry. But you know, like say the white farmer out there, he has the ability to go out and do research and development on his country and on his land, and take that product and test that product, and he can fail a number of times through that. But yes, there's the expectation on us mobs through grants process that we get it right in that first go. So being able to look at those things and say, okay, well, how do we ensure that there's an ongoing process there, that our mob are able to participate in that process, and allowed to make mistakes, and then be able to take that and capitalize on it into the future. But yeah, going into the future, you know, like that innovation, who would have thought that you could make money from burning country, you know, 10 years ago? So that innovation's there. We're starting to see that growth in biosecurity and other ecosystem services, particularly biosecurity. We've got a 10,000 kilometre coastline across the north. alone. So, you know, being able to protect that and the role that some remote communities play in managing biosecurity is real. Environmental offsets, cultural tourism, and of course that bush food that I just spoke of. So yeah, thanks for your time. If there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Barry. That was wonderful. There's been a couple of requests to get the links off your slides. Will we be able to get a copy of your slides and share them on the website after this talk today?
Yeah, I'll put those links into the chat as well.
Yeah, that would be terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got two quick questions before we wrap up with and then hand over to Anne Poelina. Barry, there's been a question. Could you explain, and I know it's complex, but could you explain reef credits and carbon credits to people who are not familiar with that term?
So the basic principle is that they are different in terms of how they're created and the sort of governance mechanisms. So the carbon credit came about as a methodology of approved methodology under the Paris Agreement, and then so it's an approved credit basically, and there's under the emissions reduction fund and climate energy regulator. I'll just put a link in there in the list for people to have a look at those sort of things to get an understanding of what that is. Whereas the reef credit is an offset, and it's basically about reducing the sediment and fertilizer load that might wash out in any given year from a wet season from streams and estuaries adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef. So it's an environmental offset, whereas the other one is a carbon credit. So that's the fundamental difference between them. But like I said, we're going to see more and more of those environmental offsets being developed. The reef credits, this group's now working on the cassowary credits. So it's the same sort of principle.
Thank you, Barry. There's another question from Jane. Barry, can you talk about women ranger groups? There seem to be more now, and it would be good to hear how that might be changing caring for country approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's encouraging to see more and more female position, and there are solely ranger operations, particularly in Northern Territory and some areas of the Cape, that are female operations. Just down the road from me in Cardwell, we've got a all-female fire management team, and they're fully trained, even to some of the levels higher trained than some of the training that I have. So it's great to see. Yeah, but you know, like the benefits, obviously, you know, it allows for that cross-gender complementary approach towards management of culture, you know, and being able to say, well, you know, the men who have sort of traditionally spoken on this sort of stuff, even if it was women's business, and maybe women's business actually got left out because of that fact, and it did in a lot of cases. So it's enabling that to sort of more equity in there. I wouldn't say equality just yet, because just, you know, like there's probably more male rangers out there than there are female rangers, but certainly, you know, like there's pushes everywhere to be able to see more and more women working in country.
Thank you so much, Barry. Look, we've got heaps more questions, but not much more time. So what I'll do, and I've popped it in the note, I've promised everyone that we'll have you back to some future dreaming workshops so that we can have some more discussions and time with you later this year, perhaps. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much. A big daggy air clap. People are clapping for you in various ways. And please feel free to stay on. Anne Poelina's going to be giving us a bit of a treat, showing us the wonderful documentary they've made about the Wuurrk. But yes, if everyone to write your comments and any other questions in the chat box there, Barry might be able to have a little peek. We'll see how time goes. All right, so thank you so much to all of our speakers in the session that we've just had. I think it's been wonderful just to hear the selection of ways of thinking and ways of doing, and to actually hear about on-the-ground projects as well. I'd now like to invite Anne Poelina to come back and join us, and she's got some really wonderful stuff to share with us. So thank you, Anne.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Barry. That was very, very impressive. So It's looking like we're covering off on all of the elements today: spirit, water, country, people. So it's just been amazing. I also want to acknowledge, I saw in the questioning, Kirsten Anker. Kirsten Anker had a question there about, you know, what's the role of women in terms of gender and where we fit in this space. And I guess one of the things that we're saying about, as Indigenous people, it's about eco, not ego, and that we all have a role to play, and that women, as well as men, have special responsibilities, but it's not about competition. It's about how we share our work, how we lift each other up, how we make each other feel very, very important and support what my work is. And I put up there in the chat this second PhD that I've just completed. The title of it was about Marwara First Law and multi-species justice and the interdependence of Indigenous wellbeing. And that's a thesis by publication. Now, one of the other things in terms of the work that we're doing is that the Marwara, the Fitzroy River, because it has agency, because it is a living being, is also the first author in many of our bodies of work. So we respect our river, we care about it, we love it, we share it. But this film, for those of you that are still on, 338 of you, this is a special opportunity because this film is not public. It's a private film that's been made by 6 nations along the Fitzroy River to show that we have one law, Wālangari law, which is a law for the whole of the river, the law of obligation, the law of reciprocity, the law of respect, the law that recognises as a river travels through the country and is place-based, the names of things change because we were given that as part of our due inheritance. And as Indigenous people from this landscape, we want to share that we have one law, Wālangari law, which we still hold today in practice. So this film is a very important film because what it does, it shows the interdependence of Indigenous law, the connectedness between human and non-humans, but most importantly, it is showcasing that this river is a sacred ancestral being. So some of the work that I'm doing in terms of legal scholarly work is looking at, you know, when I talk to my old people about what the Whanganui River was doing in New Zealand, and that how Indigenous people in New Zealand had got the rights of this river recognised under personhood, the old people said to me, "You're not human being." So the river is not a human being. It is an entity in its own right. So a lot of the work that I'm doing now is looking at legal pluralism and pushing the boundaries to say that we want to be recognized through ancestral personhood, ancestral beings which have a right to live and have guided our law. So from that perspective, I've got our amazing communication strategist. I hope he's still there, Harry. So we want to share this film. It will not be put on the website as part of today's presentation because, as I said, there's all these sorts of rules about filmmakers who also want to be recognised and acknowledged for their work. So this is a very, very unique opportunity, and I'm hoping that you will all stay on board and watch the film because it's very, very precious. So the story of the Marwara Fitzroy River, as I said the other day, is a story how we've got some very big greedy frogs who want to swallow up the water, and we've got our spears ready waiting, Ross, to give them a jab to let that water run free. Thank you all for being here and sharing that story of the Marwara, the Fitzroy River. Always was, always will be, and that's what we're standing in unity to protect, not just for ourselves, but for the nation. Thank you, Harry. Apologies, it was a little bit jumpy, but I think you get the meaning of the story that we're showcasing is that this is a globally unique river system that belongs to every Australian. It is also globally unique and so therefore belongs to the world. So we're getting organised, we're united, we're building a coalition of hope, and we are standing in solidarity with each other as 6 independent nations along the Fitzroy River, and we're just about to also include the Indigenous communities of the Dampier Peninsula. So the work that Michelle talked about with the bioregional framework, we are looking at the Dampier lands as a way to unite not just Indigenous people, but our fellow Australians who are connected by these living water systems. So that's my presentation, Michelle, and see how we go in terms of you letting me know when we're closing. But thank you all for staying with us. As I said, there was over 300 of you that had the privilege of seeing that film. It will not be screened publicly for quite some time. We are touring nationally with our elders and our young leaders. And this is a story that we believe is of global significance, but more importantly, how do we not repeat the disaster of the Murray-Darling Basin and allow our river to have the right to live and flow? Kalia Mabu, thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm sure you can see all the comments flowing in like water through the river. Everyone's been very grateful and appreciative for seeing that beautiful story. Just amazing. We will start to wrap up now. I'm just going to tend to a couple of reminders and housekeeping for all of you who are keen to stay connected to Regen Songlines. And then I'll hand back to Anne to give you a bit of a glimpse at some of the things we might get up to into the future. First of all, if you haven't already connected with our website, I'll put that link again. I'm sure you've already found it. Please do sign up for the email lists. We'll start to send out some more regular updates. The recordings will be available hopefully by next week. Just remembering and reminding that we're all volunteers. Everyone gives of their time and kindness and compassion and wisdom in a voluntary space. So please be patient as we organize the recordings to go up onto the website. And in addition to connecting on on the website, there's a Facebook page. And as Anne said, what we're trying to do is build hopefully a massive network across Australia of everybody who's already involved in caring for country and caring for each other, as well as inspiring others to get involved, to connect to their place and to build together. And it also means a powerful alliance of people who can call out to each other to take on, I guess, some of the challenges that face the Martuwarra and many other places. I'd personally like to thank everybody involved in Regen Songlines and our elders and all of our speakers today. All of the comments, it's just been an amazing day, and I do feel like something really terrific is starting. And perhaps it's just the connecting up of all the other amazing stuff that's already happening anyway, but it does feel very positive. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Anne for some final remarks, and then we shall release you all back into the wild. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michelle. And I think first of all, thank you to the participants that registered and came online and joined us for this session. It's, you know, it is NAIDOC week. How do we heal our country together? How do we heal and hold our living water systems? So very important that if we're going to be leading this, that we've got amazing people who are joining in the dialogue. I make it very, very clear, because sometimes people like to brand you as an activist, and I say, no, I'm an actionist. I am here to commit to planetary well-being, because I believe that we need transformative action. And with the leaders that you have standing with you, as well as with us, as well as those in the chat, I think there is a time to look at and believe that there is hope for our nation, and that this hope must be grounded in the collective wisdom of all of us as citizens who come together, because we know that government are failing, that we know that our environmental laws and native title, and, you know, particularly in terms of WA with the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill, all of these systems are failing. And unless we come together as citizens united in a unity pathway where we can share information, where we can collaborate, where we can have cooperation, we won't get there. But I believe today has been a great day for building hope. Thank you to the amazing speakers, to Alana for her beautiful work, to Chels, to Tyson, to Mary, to Ross, and to hear what Barry is doing, and right across Northern Australia with the fire. And as I said earlier, we seem to have ignited the human spirit. This is about fire, water, people, land, and all of us coming together. It's about eco, not ego. It's about everyone having a rightful place. It's about women leaders rising in partnership with our men and working in harmony and peace. And I think this is a really encouraging day. So as I said, and Michelle is saying, we want to thank you all for being part of the Regenerative Songline launch. The Regenerative Songlines will continue to grow at the online directory and promote our Australian work to our international networks through Common Earth and the Regenerative Roadmap initiatives globally. And we also aim to host and showcase these events online round about every 3 months, and we want to showcase Indigenous-led regenerative projects and non-Indigenous projects. And yeah, with all of that, I just want to encourage you all to join our mailing list, which you can find on our website. Once again, thank you for being on board, being part of this journey, part of this story. I was on a webinar the other day and someone said, we're not revolutionaries, we're solutionaries. And so that's what we are dreaming, that we are dreaming a new way to unite with fellow Australians, to show these community-led designed projects that Indigenous people right across the country are looking to populate on our map. It is about place-based governance. Wherever you live, you really need to start to form a relationship, one with Indigenous people, and two, on the country that you call home. So from all of that, all of our wonderful people, I want to thank you, Michelle, for your leadership, for the work that's been done behind the scenes by James. I also want to acknowledge Reese Proudfoot's investment from WWF to getting the website happening. And as Michelle said, we're volunteers. We're looking to really create an opportunity to connect. And yeah, as we're saying, unless we're going to factor in the Indigenous wisdom of Indigenous people, we will not be able to right-size the planet. But I think this project shows that we are coming with a spirit of goodwill, of love and hope and peace. And thank each and every one of you that are still standing here with us today. So thank you, Galia Mabu, So it's been a wonderful day to talk, and a word that I have in my language is muja. So Mabu Nganga mujas. So thank you all, friends of our nation, friends of the earth, friends of this common home that we call Mother Earth. Thank you very much. Galia Mabu.